This is a bit more of a commentary rather than just sitting here and as a fertilizer society we're discussing fertilizing things. But it makes me think, who drives agricultural farming? Is it the farmers or the input suppliers or the retailers or the consumers? So once again we're sitting in silos and we're actually not looking at who's going to eat the stuff that we're producing. Secondly, there's a confusion that's coming up and it's going to be manipulated. I think it's almost purposefully caused because suddenly we've got biological farming, we've got biofertilizers, we've got biotechnology. So where's the GMO and the confusion in this? It all sounds the same. The microorganisms we're speaking about, the biofertilizer we're talking about, is it genetically modified? When we go to a farmer, how is it bred? How does the farmer know? Because the farmer's not sitting with us here. We are deciding for them, this is what you're going to have. And then the further confusion and in this whole system, the food system, is there a whole lot of standards that complicate things so much more. So now we've got global GAP, good agricultural practices, sustainable farming, regenerative farming, farming for the future, certified organic farming. What is happening to our poor farmer? How are they going to determine what's right and what's wrong here?
I think, thank you for that question, and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the reasons that Peter asked me to raise this concern, and it's one of the reasons why we are looking at it in Western Australia, trying to come up with at least some standard definition, at least some I guess rules around what is regenerative agriculture. It's not, and it shouldn't be, the emotional approach that's being driven by, can I say, urban populations that are out of touch with agriculture, and that's an Australian viewpoint for sure. We have most of our populations in the main cities, and unlike it used to be in the 50s and 60s where everyone had a relative who was doing farming in the wheat belt, that connection has been completely broken. So we're now getting people that are talking to the urban public, and they're driving some of these emotional aspects, and they're talking about the damage that's being done to soils and things like that. And the farmer and I guess the agriculturalists are not pushing back enough and should be saying these things are good practices, we are doing things properly, there are improvements that could be made. But how we narrow down the number of those definitions and aspects and things, and even titles for farming, is I think something that's very important, because it is going to be just a confusing and a confusing space that people don't know what to do. Can't choose the right thing. I don't know if I've answered your question properly, but I'm definitely agreeing with you. Yeah.
I can just say I don't think the fertilizer industry should drive that position. That's definitely a thing of our crop organisations like Grain SA. They're looking at conservation farming, all this sort of stuff. So what they're saying is they're going to try and do this and experiment, because they've already got potions. And Chris has come back from the Cape, Dr. Johan Strauss. He's done a lot of work there. I think they've been for 20 years.
Yeah, the oldest ones.
So they are getting some results feedback. So we will probably see at the next conference, combined congress at Bloemfontein, the crop science, soil science, and those guys, they're going to report back and say this is what they're getting. I think what we should be saying is that make ready, there's something coming this way. I don't think we need to be prepared to look at what's going on and what's being advised and how are we going to fit into that. And I think we obviously don't going to drive this, that's for sure, because we mustn't just be reactive all the time. So we must sort of say, what would we as an industry like to see happening? And so that it doesn't get out of our hands and out of our control. We need something there as well to modify what's going on. I think that's basically what we need to say.
I don't want to be rude, but I look at the causes. These are the results. Soil acidity is caused by
low pH.
soil compaction is caused by
Farming.
water
Heavy
repellence,
equipment.
lack of organic matter, soil nutrient status, soil organic carbon, wind erosion, water erosion, are caused by.
They're all caused by farming. Yeah.
They're single.
I'm not going to
cost.
bite.
You talk about more than $2.5 billion.
Yeah, that's about right.
You can do a lot of regenerative farming for that. And
Like,
the thing is, most of these problems, and I hope I was clear in my presentation, are caused by the overuse of synthetic fertilizers. And with all due respect, and I know that calcium and lime are essentials in the soil, but you lose so much nitrates applying it. I wonder what that has to do with sustainability. This is, if you do what you do, you get what you got. And a little bit not plowing or a little bit less pesticides doesn't bring us anything. And I'm not talking about city farming. I'm talking about large-scale operations that need to make money. But at this moment, they lose so much money on lack of knowledge on how things work. And I think we all need to emphasize on that.
yeah.
It's a remark, it was not a question.
No,
sorry.
that's okay. I think I think you're right, and those figures, and I'll put those figures up to show there is room for improvement. But at the moment, those farmers who are managing 17 million hectares are profitable. They are making money. At what cost to the soil and to those things? That is a question that I propose and that we must evaluate, and we must work out ways of making it easy for farmers to change. But I did make the point that, you know, if they're going to change, it needs to be a way that is still profitable, and they just need to know that it's worked. So we need to probably, I think the point you're making is that perhaps there are some of the things that you spoke about this morning that could fit into those trials that we're proposing, and some of those approaches, so that we are able to demonstrate in our environment, under our conditions, that they are a profitable practice to adopt, that they work. I would challenge you a little bit on mycorrhizas, for example, where they've come from and where they've been developed, and then putting them into another environment is an enormous challenge. And I worked on mycorrhizas before I became a soil acidity person. So I think putting them into a foreign environment is an extremely difficult challenge.
When it comes back to mycorrhizal, I like to react. May I remind that plants are on this earth 450 million years, that the first fossils of mycorrhizae were found not long after that, after the first development of ferns, and that our earth at that time was called Pangaea, one continent.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of research has shown that some mycorrhizal species, not all, but some mycorrhizal species, are in Australia just as indigenous as in the UK or in India. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
And if it matters, for all sakes, mankind has been dragging around with plants, so there's not a single soul in the world that can tell me which mycorrhizae is indigenous. There's no way to prove it, and there's no way to keep that standing.
Yeah.
It is fear of change that drives this type of practices. No one ever cared on how much mycorrhizae where grew. And now it would be a matter of concern. I
don't mind about introducing ones, they just need to be adapted. But I think we'll have that discussion at lunchtime if we can, because that would be quite interesting. Yep.
Sorry, Chris, just a question. You use the word profitable often in your talks, and you obviously in your mindset link it very closely to sustainable. In fact, you said we should change the word sustainable to continuously profitable.
Yep.
But isn't that where the rub is? Because if we were to value the changes in the soils that have happened in Western Australia, if I listen to you carefully, in a real way, and their functionality maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm using big words that I shouldn't be, and we actually put a value to that. Is wheat farming in Western Australia profitable? If the governments were to tax us for buggering up the environment, would we be profitable as agriculturalists with our traditional systems, our traditional present Western cultural practices that are acceptable, so-called acceptable practices? Would we be profitable?
I think that's an excellent question. I don't know that I have the answer for you. On the flip side of that is, while we can say we've compacted and we've acidified and those sort of things, we've actually also improved a lot of things as well to enable us to grow crops. Whereas the Western Australian circumstance is that for virtually all of that soil was so deficient in phosphorus, so deficient in trace elements, that it was not possible to grow a crop on those soils. We had processes where we introduced clover laid pastures, so clover wheat rotations. We put before that we had to put superphosphate on, and then super copper moly zinc fertilisers. Without those, we wouldn't be farming at all. So that's on the plus side, and we've got on the negative side the soil degradation that we're now trying to catch up with, and quite rightly look at the systems and see how we can improve our management and improve the soil husbandry so that we don't then degrade again. But yeah, if we were to take an average of all of those costs over all of the hectares and deduct it, I think what we're saying is that farming has essentially been mining or using up some aspects of our soils. They've added other aspects. The balance, we're just exactly where it turns out, I'm not sure. Fortunately, I think for a lot of farmers at the moment, we don't have that system of taxing our soils or taxing the quality of soils. Likewise, we don't really pay for the benefits that they do in terms of the ecosystem services that whole wheat belt does supply to the gradual water that ends up in Perth or whatever else. So it's a very good point.
Thank you, Chris. In your presentation, you mentioned about the importance of design in the long-term rotational experiments, where I indicated that it would be important to include each and every crop each year within this cycle. But in terms of analysis and interpretation, to get more meaningful information from these long-term rotational experiments, would you comment on that, please? Because in some instances, people use continuity analysis, where you take one individual plot and just look at what happens to that individual plot over a period of time, and thus compare different plots.
Yep, that's a good question. I don't have the statistical solutions for doing it, but at the moment we would, if we were to have, if we were to have every phase of each rotation in each year, then we would be treating them, if it's a 4-year rotation, for example, we would be treating those as 4 separate systems and coming up with measures over that. I think there'll be soil measurements that would be variable depending on which season, which crop responded best in which season, but then there's also the profitability aspects of it as well. Or I guess things come back to profitability and back to dollars and cents, and that's one aspect of how to look at it. It would have to be a simplified economic analysis, because we would have to give the same value to canola in each year, as an example, whether it was in year 1 or year 2 or year 3. Whereas that's another quite significant factor for farm profitability, is how the farmers manage the sale of their grain in whichever year, and whether they retain some on farm or sell it at better prices or whatever. So that's another layer of complexity that we probably would have to avoid. But I think, I'm looking at the audience and see if there's any comments on measures of soil health that we could roll into our assessments. We tend to reduce them down to single measurements of the things that we can analyse easily. Comments on how we compare systems.
My question is addressed to the Chairman. Whilst the info exchange over the last 2 days has been most informative and valuable, this exchange is occurring within the industry. My question is the following: how do we get the information to the farmer? And secondly, would Fertasa consider road shows to be held around the country to share the information with the people around who really matter, i.e. the farmer? How do we get Fertasa closer to the farmer, who is ultimately our client?
I think that is the goal with the panel discussion, coordinated extension of knowledge. That's what we should be discussing there. So if you've got any, you've mentioned road shows, what we do extend is that we're going to write a proceedings of this, what's happening, going to take out the essence of all the messages and compile them, and then have them carried over, either by different flyers or pamphlets or publications, or on our website. That's the sort of thing we're looking at. So we're open to any comments that should be done that are practically exercisable. So that's what we're thinking about that. I think regarding that thing, what are we going to do with the information we've got now? We have to decide, how do we carry it over? What is the essence of every presentation? I think for that purpose, I think I'm going to ask every presenter that we can think about that has anything that they would like to add and suggest how we should be integrating all this information that we've had today. So Jude, if you have anything you want to say, you can just sit there and comment on what your take is on this, and how do we carry this information that we've generated here out to our public or to our customers.
I find that most of the talks have actually emphasized on the importance of soil health. So this implies that we should be geared towards promoting farming activities that restore and maintain soil health. Now, there's also the issue of new and improved techniques for measuring various soil properties, as well as the importance of making the correct interpretation of analytical data. I strongly believe that, as the first speaker today mentioned, is that we must rethink our agricultural practices in order to achieve these, to achieve and maintain the soil health, which is necessary for improving crop yields and soil productivity. Now, this, of course, will ensure that we make the farmers aware of what are these practices that they should adopt in order to maintain appropriate soil health. Yeah. Now, how this can be done, I thought maybe a possibility of establishing and strengthening partnerships that can work together between the farmers and industries and organizations which are involved in agriculture, and to ensure that the farmers at least get this information, so as to focus on the economic viability of the farms as well as the conservation of nature. How this can be effective, I'm really not sure how it can be done, but that is my view.
Okay. You've all heard that. Thank you, Jude. I think that's a good suggestion. We should consider doing it like that. We, of course, have our committees, and we have to decide how we're going to carry this out. But good suggestions there. Prof. Leon has unfortunately had to leave. He won't be here. Fossey, I don't think you're at, how are you going to use your analysis to help these people decide what to do? Do you think it's it's fair of me to ask you?
No, I would say that the main issue here is that we need to streamline the flow of information to the farmer. I think we actually sit here as the middleman, getting all this information, and it's our responsibility to carry this over. So we can do it in one or two ways, or both ways actually. As we need to think short term, in other words, how do we sort of combine what we saw here today, put it on, I don't know, DVD or some sort of presentation format so we can, let more people hear what was said, and then long term, obviously, collaboration between different communities, companies, and carry the information forward and obviously pave the way then for future collaboration and information flow to the farmers.
Oh, thank you, Fossey. That's very helpful. We should do that. I think it's great. And we've also, I've passed over you, Chris, but I think you've given your best, and I think we'll settle with that.
Thanks, Peter. I think what we can do, the issue here is that we're all sitting with information overload. The number of WhatsApps, the number of emails that we receive daily. But maybe each of these presentations, what we must do, and of course the press is here, so they can also play a role. I don't know if they're still here. They can also play a role to disseminate this information. And then maybe what we can do is just to write a one-pager. Because, if you receive something more than 2 or 3 pages, I just ignore it. We haven't got the time. So that maybe each of us must just write a one-pager with the essence of the presentation, and then we can send to farmers, if we can get the telephone numbers or whatever, just a note and say, this is available on the fertilizer or Fertasa website. And give him 2 sentences. Just to say, this is the information. If you're interested, go to the Fertasa website and read the one-pager. We mustn't write novels, because people don't read novels.
Thank you, Juan. I think that's quite nice. I think we should ask as many as possible, people that are at this symposium, to give us their comments. I think the comments have been given out. You can, what you think about the organization, the food and stuff everything that's excellent. What do you think is the carry-out message from the symposium on that form? And we can actually, I think it's a very good idea. All the different aspects that have been discussed and what the feeling is about attendance of this Congress, of the symposium. I think that will be a start. But we do definitely, all the presentations will be available to study in detail. They'll be on our website. And also the written comments, the written presentations. So if you want to study them, they will be there. And we will also then look at ways of getting this information over. I think that's very important. We've also got a video of everything here, so we can make excerpts out of that, and perhaps also make it available to a wider audience. Everybody can, if they get there, they will be able to log into that, I suppose. That's what we were thinking. If you have time to look at it again, I think it'll be worth it. So some of us will probably be doing that. Thanks, Sean. That's very, yeah. I don't know how it works. I don't have Facebook, but Candace does and Hermine does. Prof doesn't have either. We're the generation that weren't born with computer chips in our brains. So we've got an excuse. Right, the next, Martin Botha, you still here? In the flesh.
In the flesh.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter, there's not much that I can add. I think it has been summed up previously. And the only comment that I would add is we must look at the cost factor to the farmer and also at the end user. Doesn't help. We try all this pie in the sky and they can't produce a crop with the means that we say would work for them. Going totally organic is expensive, and also in a lot of the environments it's not possible. So we must just look at, yes, we say there's too much nitrogen used, but how do you fix it and still produce a crop that the consumer wants, and also how do you produce it at a price that a consumer is prepared to pay?
And obviously, how can the farmer survive financially as well to do that? So that's coming back to that again. It has to be economically feasible, otherwise it won't be able to happen. I know you have to say what sort of costs you're looking at, but I agree. Thanks, Martin. That's very good. I think so.
Can I comment on that?
You can, yes, Pius.
I completely and totally and utterly disagree with you. These are such common words, heard on every continent where I'm allowed. And it's all time the same crap. Yes, but is it economic feasible? And how would you do it with less nitrogen? And it is too much one-sided, industrial-driven. This, what you say, has nothing to do with the farmer. Because every farmer that is really working on regenerative agriculture, on looking out for the future, feeding his children and grandchildren, every farmer agrees on the fact that he's a lot cheaper out, he doesn't need to buy equipment every year, he keeps more money in the pocket because he is no longer an industrial junk. And I'm really dead serious about it. The things you're saying are too common, and it doesn't change anything. I'm not saying that the whole world needs to produce organically. I've never said that. But the way we act now has an end, and we all know that. And my story about the cost of nitrogen, that's not bullshit, that's true. And when we talk about costs in agriculture, we start, and we are obliged to the society to start accounting differently. And I don't care what industry you represent, we have to start calculating in true costs. And when you talk about true costs, the current agriculture has no survival, no way of surviving. Because the true cost, and one day somebody has to pay, the true cost of agriculture today is way too high, and we will not feed 10 billion people the way we work now. So I really want to emphasize on this, and this is also a message to Fertasa, which represent the fertilizer industry. It's fine with me, but you've got to change, definitely.
I think the obvious question we have to ask is, how long do you predict it's going to last and not fail?
What is going to last?
The way that the things are being done in South Africa, for instance. Are you guaranteeing an outcome within a certain time frame?
That's a good question. Do you?
We reckon that what's happening now can be mitigated. I think what Chris has said, it costs a certain amount of money. It can be held on as a sustainable process that works at the moment. So in terms of this, the users of the new system have to be certain that they're going to be able to survive and thrive in the new system. So that's and I don't think, is there any proof at the moment? I think we still sub judice. Some are still looking at this conservation agriculture. Dr. Strauss down in the Cape doing also regenerative and conservation agriculture. So the results aren't out yet. Perhaps if they do come quicker, It's going to take a long time to do that as well. And I think that's what we say. If you've said it should be changed, how quickly should it be changed? That's the thing that we have to decide. And to what extent must it be changed? And I think that's the important questions we want to know what's going on here. Just on regenerative agriculture. We've been looking at other stuff as well. I think Martin probably didn't necessarily report on that because they're all guys using biological fertilizers. They're developing them. Jaco, I'd like your opinion just now as well about this, and I think that's what we need to be done. So we need actual answers, when and how. How do we do it?
Yeah, well, these answers are there. I know people don't like to read novels, but the answers are there already. And we have to take these answers seriously. We've all grown up in a certain way of thinking, and the worst thing that can happen to man is have an opinion, because that's where the thinking stops. And we need to be open to change, because it has been proven time over time, both in practical ways, farmers that say, I'll never go back to the current agriculture, I'll never go back. So that says something. Whether you like it as an academic proof, I don't mind. Because how can you prove systems? How have you been proving the current agriculture is okay? You haven't. So don't ask from people that think differently and future-minded to have proofs that you don't even give yourself. It's more a matter of working together. And what we lack altogether, both the organic people and the inorganic people, what we all lack is the right wording. We talk about organic matter in the soil, but we don't talk about the state of that organic matter. We talk about carbon dioxide sequestering in the soil, but we don't know how to do it. Seriously, not a scientist in the world can answer that question. We don't know how to do it. So that's a challenge, not for us, for everybody. That's just one example when it comes to organic matter. And you can have organic matter and the wind blows it all away. You have windstorms in Australia. We have had in the US and Canada the dust bowls. Haven't we learned? Organic matter by itself doesn't do a lot in the soil. It's food for organisms. If you don't have the organisms, what the hell is that organic matter doing there? Even if it's not bound with fungi to the mineral particles, it will blow away and it will seep out. How much proof do you need? So we shouldn't be struggling together. We shouldn't be fighting. We should be looking very responsible to agriculture in 20 years' time. It's okay. 48% of the population in this world thanks its life, the majority here I see, thanks its life to chemical fertilizers. It's fine. We have proven to feed the world. It's fine. Nobody made a mistake. But times are changing. And we need to be more sustainable. We need to get rid of most of our carbon dioxide exhaust. And farmers can be instrumental there. So I challenge the industry, help the farmers. Help the farmers to achieve our common goals. And it's not what I say. It's what the FAO said already in 2014 with a comprehensive report from fertilizing, precision farming, etc. You can have an increase of 7% of the current harvests as predicted. Then there's new technology and also satellite technology that might help for another 14%. But the FAO says the majority of the increase of our produce, agriculture produce, must come from soil improvement. And that was a report written by over 200 scientists in the world, and I challenge you to challenge them.
Okay. I think that's very good, because what we're doing is, that's why Fertasa has changed its whole objective, going from chemical fertilizers. We've got most of our members are now producers of organic or semi-organic fertilizers. And so that is the reason we should go. Why we did that is to look at this stewardship of the soils. And I think that was what we did we're doing that. So what we're asking now is, we will support those farmers, I'm sure, that want to change. Should we be driving it, or should somebody else be driving it? We'll be supporting it, obviously, because we have to supply what our clients want. So it will be driven by the demand of the user. So that is where we need to know, where do we start? I think that's what we were talking about. Whose responsibility is this? It's all of our responsibility, sure. We as a fertilizer industry will support that. We're flexible enough as well. Even our larger companies have also diversified into this. So we're waiting. That's what we're waiting for. So if you want to ask us what we're doing, we're waiting. We're ready.
I think where one thing has worked well in Western Australia that I could pass on is that always, all the different companies will always have their purpose or their products and things that are going to be different. But wherever there is a general standard message, it helps enormously that everybody's on the same page and that everybody is giving that same message. That helps farmers, and we have advisors that talk to farmers as well, be less confused about the standard high-level messages. And if those are clear and concise, then there's still plenty of room for the different industries, the different products and things to be talking about what their advantages or disadvantages, whatever, are.
I once met an advocate from the High Court of South Africa who told me one should never, the one word in Afrikaans is redeneer, and the other one is kind of philosophia. Don't philosophize, rather reason. I found the presentation about the organisms and the biology very interesting. I think that we do miss something there. And I've read somewhere for a fact that plants do react to music. I've also read somewhere for a fact that plants in the veld, especially trees, do communicate when being fed on by kudu or camelpad, giraffe. So what I'm saying, somewhere, is a plant really that simple, and that I think we don't understand the system totally. So I believe that we are missing something, and I think we should be open-minded about that. I don't have the answer, but I think we should keep on looking and try to discover that missing link.
From my side, I really agree with Chris's interpretation as well. I don't think we totally understand what's going on. Nature is much more advanced than we are giving credit for, whether it's plants, microorganisms. On that, I would also like to incorporate the importance of soil. If the soil is not, the soil is the first component that you need to treat. It's like if you are sick, you need to find the most important part first. And the soil, from my limited point of view, is that this is the most important part. This is where the first action for treatment needs to be, to get everything, to get the whole system better and working again. I don't believe in single concept solutions. There's, in my view, no silver bullets. It will probably be a combination of a variety of solutions and answers that's going to work together and integrated with each other. A whole toolbox that's going to be used. You cannot only use a hammer or a screwdriver. You always need a whole toolbox. Although I'm usually using a hammer a lot, but any case, yeah, that's just from my my side that I really do think that we need to open ourselves up to new solutions, new ways of thinking, and don't limit ourselves to single concepts. Really go for a whole toolbox of solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaco. I think that's very wise comments. My brother-in-law was a tiffy in the Air Force. And his motto was used as a tiffy. When in doubt, use a hammer. The bigger the doubt, the bigger the hammer. So we don't want that sort of thing happening. So we're going to look at that. Christo, you've got something to say for us.
Yes, can you hear me? There's a couple of words that I always try and use when I tackle some of these problems. And maybe by chance, our approach over the last, I would say, 20 years in our company was and I can only describe it as always telling farmers, get rid of your tunnel vision approach. And I think there's been too much tunnel visioning in the past, especially, and sorry for the fertilizer companies, from their side in terms of nitrogen use and all those, where I agree with bias, where they, and I can give you some examples. Up to 10 years ago, when I moved to the Cape, you couldn't find you couldn't get a soil analysis where they did sulfur analysis or where they did any micronutrient analysis. So my question was, how do you do a recommendation if you don't know those elements? And that's not even the lot that Pius mentioned. And then to touch on what Chris was saying, in this regenerative farming idea, it's not a single thing. It's a combination, as you said. What we were saying, and it's not organic, we say there should be balance. The approach must always be balance, and balance between elements, balance between systems, balance between soil, nutrients and microorganisms, as far as you possibly can. We don't have the answers. We've got specific examples at this point where we exactly did what Pi said, and we've seen it, and it's not a 1 year thing. Only after 3 years, and the farmers sticking to the system, where we balance things and we try to use all of these that I mentioned, the biological side, the chemical side, the soil side, and I'm not even a soil scientist, we try to balance it at the best of our ability, that we've seen incredible increases in yields, quality, and it's a big farm, and it's a very rich person in South Africa's farm, a wine grape farm. So we've got examples where we've seen it. If you use the approach of balance and balancing all these things as far as possible, the knowledge that you have currently, it will improve over time as we get more information, but at least start with a balanced and not a tunnel vision approach. Get rid of the tunnel vision thing.
What is your take on this whole regenerative agriculture systems? What should we be doing? How should we who should be driving it? What should the fertilizer industry be doing? And how do we see the future in that?
Yes, regarding the regenerative systems, I myself, I'm in favor of it, but we must take into account especially the soil physics. I'm a bit worried about the soil physics that's usually been left behind. But yeah, and I think it's on a combination of the regeneration story. We have much to learn in that on their concepts, but we must also see our old school things that we have learned and we are still learning today, and we must mix them. But yeah, we must burn less energy and be more efficient. So, yeah, going forward, I think we must use the communication technology like Facebook more. I went into Fertasa Facebook page this morning, and there's already some information of this event available there. We must use that as well.
Yes, thank you. And inspired by your words, I thought, well, regenerative agriculture, regenerative, does that mean, I didn't invent the word regenerative agriculture, but it implies that so far we have been working on degenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
So maybe that concludes the message.
In summing up and the recording of the proceedings, we need to take into account the potential polarization that has occurred today. We really need to look at it. I mean, it's okay, there's organic and there's inorganic. There have been a lot of radical approaches, but we've seen this polarization stated and inferred and applauded. So it's just something, you know, we need a balance. Krista spoke about a balance. We need a balance also between emotion and science.
Peter, I think there's a guy with the name of John Keogh, and he's the author of quite a few books on mind power. And one of his books, he wrote that nothing will change unless, and it's a big unless, we change our thinking. And that's what Paya said. I think a lot of farmers, I think a lot of companies in South Africa are thinking differently nowadays. So we're moving towards that direction. But then we must also realize that farming is a business enterprise. And if that business is not profitable, it will not stay in business. In other words, profitability is a prerequisite for sustainability. And if you can balance that, I think we will be there and it will be successful.
I think it's so important that we realize that we are standing here at a point of deviation or, there's a
crossroads.
Yeah, crossroads. That's how I see today. Right? And I think we all agree that we are working in a very complex and a very complicated environment. You can talk about the complex or the interaction between the soil and the plant, the climate, and then the other factors that are coming in. For instance, the insects, the plants, the diseases, etc. Right. So and the soil itself is already a very complex situation. And therefore, my personal opinion is that it's more difficult for an agronomist or for a soil scientist to make a good recommendation to a farmer than it is for a doctor to recommend something to a patient. It's much simpler to work with a human being than to work with a complex situation that we're working with. Now, I also fully agree that we have to look at the future and say what are we going to change and what must change. And that must start with awareness, to make people aware that things must change. Otherwise it will not change. But then secondly, when you start, it's easy for us as scientists sitting here and saying, yes, things must change. But when we start talking to farmers, they don't want to hear the philosophy like Chris said at the back there. Then we must come up with real answers to say, what is it that we must do? You tell us. Now we must also acknowledge the fact that there were many changes in the last 50 years. My professor in agronomy, the first 2 lessons he spent on the importance of the moldboard plough. He's by now, I'd say his name was Jan Ploeg, Jan Mulkop. Because that was the importance of the plough at that stage. Remember, that's in the 70s. Since then, the moldboard plough almost disappeared in the country. So many things have changed since then. And all we are saying is we are still busy with the change. And we must take it further. Coming back to this complex situation or the complex system that we are operating with, the fertilizer industry are not the only players in this. And therefore, although I agree that the Fertilizer Association can take the lead to take this forward, we have to involve other players in this. You mentioned the Grain SA, that's representing the farmers. But we also need to think of the people supplying the herbicides, the pesticides, the people doing the research. Oh no, they're not people, the researchers. We have to get them in. Right? So we have to think of that. And if you ask me now, what do you have in mind? I think we must, and the Fertasa can take the lead to say, let us organize or arrange a conference or a symposium, whatever you want to call it. A symposium, definition of that is a place where people get together to drink. Check it in the
and eat as well, yeah.
Right. So maybe we must make it a conference and involve other people and make it something more than just a one-day or a two-day symposium to discuss the various aspects of this, to say, but this is a purpose, we want to know, we're going with this. And from that, there must be an action plan. Because it's not something that we can all sit around the table today. I tell you, we've got numerous PhDs and MSCs sitting around here today. We put them into a room, we will get as many answers as people. Right. So each one will have their own ideas of what the solution will be. So to get to the right solution, you need people to discuss, and to talk, and to experiment, and to try, and it's going to be a process. And I tell you, if in 20 years' time we are still alive, two of us, we may see changes. And then we can look back. But I think we must get other people involved and discuss before we go out. And we can create the awareness, that's fine. But to come up with answers today, I think will be very difficult.
I agree with that. I think probably more than that, we have to go in conjunction with Grain SA, all these people that are actually, they're already looking at the conservation tillage, looking at this thing. So we have to be, it can't be just one person. We have to take at least 2 or 3 bodies that should be doing a joint venture, because they've got expertise, we've got expertise. So at least South African Agriculture Union or whoever, or the Grain SA, we need to do that because they've committed themselves to that already. So I think that's a good idea. Very good.
If that's a good idea, we need the government as well.
The government, I didn't mention them, but they probably should be looking at that as well.
Yeah, because the government, with the current laws on what I heard, Group 1, 2, and 3, makes it almost impossible to move forward. If you have to prove, and I made a note on that, I'm sorry, face recognition. If you look at, and you gave an excellent presentation on that, you need to prove the quality of the product. That's simple. Almost. Efficacy of the product. How can you prove that? It's not a pesticide. A pesticide you spray on a plant, the insect drops off, it's dead, works.
Bodies.
That's not how biology works. So, efficacy of the product depends on like a quintillion factors, but it's being asked for in order to get a registration. These rules are written by chemical experts, not by biologists. And the safety of the product, for most bacteria, they're in your hair. What do you want to prove on safety? Whereas 100% of the chemicals are by definition unsafe. Then the bacteria need to be proven for safety. So we really need to reconsider some things that are demanded in order to have a fair playing field in the future.
Absolutely. I think that's true. We had Professor Patrick Desjardins last year. He's also in the EU regulatory system. Yeah, and he is too. So there must have been some changes going on, because we need to follow what they're doing, because we have to also align with them if we're exporting goods. So it's a good idea to do that. Last year, the message we got was not as simple as they haven't sorted it out yet. It almost seemed more stringent than we were contemplating. So unless they've changed quite a bit and you've influenced them, we're following that cue to a large degree as well. So we were looking at you, Pius. You must change it so that we can follow suit. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Then we can do that. We will be very happy. Christo? See Christo smiling already. Okay, I think we've probably exhausted everything. Ari, do you want to put a cherry on the cake?
Yeah, I just want to say something. We don't learn from history. In the 70s, exactly these problems were put on the table. I've still got the paper clippings where it was warned against what we were achieving with our practice in terms of acidification, overuse of fertilizers. That was already said in the 70s. I'll bring you the paper clippings in South Africa by an eminent professor who was actually almost ostracized out of Venus here because of what he said. And today, after 50 years, we are back exactly at square one. What was shown in Australia, the acidification, is exactly what we have here. The overuse, we are still propagating that. So I'm glad to hear there are even people here said that organic matter does not matter at all. And some of our eminent leaders. So I'm just glad that today has happened. Maybe after 50 years, we can drop this tunnel vision and get back to real basics. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ari. I think Pius has said the magic words. If you want to fight, you'll get a fight. So we have to convince people to do that. I think that's how we should be doing it, and to cooperating with everybody to get it done. The fight obviously didn't work, so we need to be cooperating. I think we've probably reached our limit of any mindful or valuable discussion. We've listened to what you've said, and I think our presenters deserve a huge round of applause for the way that they've led us.